As we hit the second night turn here, actually moving into November 28th. I should have had the last one as November 27th. Maybe I'll change the numbering on it if I can. Anyway, the Chinese did a lot of opening fire, and you can see it pretty much went to ground with most of the UN forces. Most of them are actually US. The reason being, you know, if they're coordinating fire from a couple of units against one of mine, they're getting more firepower in than I am. So I might as well not shoot and probably prevent any damage from happening. We had some out of ammos coming from places like here, but it doesn't really matter because there's a headquarters. But these finished off their fire, and they're now completely out of ammo. The poor weather doesn't really do anything because there's no visibility at night anyway. I think that's the only thing it affects. The low ammo, I don't think it affects assault combat, but I might have to look that up. It should, but I'm not sure. We also opened things up by building some stuff here. We're building a couple of defensive breastworks, and also there's a roadblock block being built in the same hex on this one. Basically what I'm looking at is interdicting any movement by the Marines towards the base. And since they can't evacuate it until the 30th or after the 30th, I got some time to build some defenses. If I could get control of this area, I would do the same. But so far it doesn't look like I am, and in fact it looks like the troops that I've sent after the US Army are not sufficient for the task. Historically, it was over here that the Chinese had the biggest problem where against the Marines. Oh, geez, I'm forgetting the Marine Elan roll. I don't think I've applied that either. I don't know how much effect it's had. Certainly they haven't attacked. It's whether or not the Chinese rolled any sixes, which would have been re-rolled in that case. Much more limited fire here. I've taken some significant damage. I don't have as many units. I've got to rethink what I'm going to do. Maybe try to swing back around and come over here, but the problem is with that preemptive fire, I'm not really in a position to do that. So over there it looks pretty bad for the Chinese actually. Anyway. Now we move to their movement phase, and all the guys who fired aren't going to get to move. And the problem with this is, although since the Chinese always go first, it's not that big a problem. I got to get out of there next turn. I don't want to be up in there fighting them, at least not, you know, where I don't have good odds in the morning. Only nighttime attacks make a lot of sense for the Chinese. But if I've got supposedly overwhelming numbers, you'd think I could just press the attack during the day. I'm not so sure about that. Okay, after movement by the Chinese, and then where the UN forces were not suppressed, they fired. And you can see they suppressed some of the Chinese with fire, actually. And then places over here, they did some significant damage. Starting to see a big pile up there. And it's really the problem is assaulting is tough. I mean, if you can pick off little units. Again though, we're at the limit where the suppressed markers maybe aren't as many as you need. I could remove the UN ones because their fire phase is the only thing. Now I have the opportunity to do support fire. So in some cases, for example, with the headquarters, I might choose to use support fire instead of just assaulting. I'm not convinced there's any great advantage to doing that. There's actually some disadvantages to firing. So if you're just adding the same amount, which for example with the headquarters you are, that's not a big deal. I think I forgot to add my Chinese headquarters in when I was firing though. There's a lot of little things, you know, the Chinese headquarters count for fire support for every firing, and I think it's because of supply availability, but the UN headquarters don't count for something like that because theirs don't seem to apply in that particular, you know, they don't provide supplies, and just a lot of weird little rules in this game to keep track of. Alright, I'm going to do the assaults now. I managed to save the Chinese unit that was trapped back here kind of out of supply. Now I've got a UN unit, Marines in that situation. Over here things didn't go as well. We're seeing losses building up on the Chinese side. One thing that I think I forgot about, or whatever, before is these remnant units. You can't combine them with real brigades. I don't know if they can combine together. I've been doing that too, if that's the case. No more than 3 CCF battalions can participate in an assault, and they have to be part of the same division. Remnants can never combine with any other unit. Yeah, so I've definitely cheated with that, at least having remnants attacking with each other. You know, there is no easy way to absorb all these rules. So if this became, you know, a game that you wanted to really kind of play a lot of, you could probably get down to getting the rules right most of the time. But it's a one-off game with its own little weird system. I just can't see it, you know? I can't see... You don't want to make a game like this that's this kind of... this many exceptions, etc., without decent play aids to help you. Anyway, I'm still toying with the idea of tossing this play out, just because. But you know, it's a war game. You screw some things up, and it still comes kind of close and gives you a picture of what's going on. One kind of cool thing I had down here. Got a destroyed armored unit. Armored units are weird because they really suck in melee or in assault combat, but they're pretty good at fire combat. They've got, you know, that 9-point firing value, which means that I'm taking something pretty decent out of play, but it seems better than... I'm not even sure if they count against my victory conditions taking losses on them. I think they do. So I don't know. The regular units have a little bit more solidity in terms of defensive positioning. So it's kind of tough because I'm able to get those fires off with the 9-point guns, but I feel like my stack would get much too weak if I started taking losses. Plus, it's a special unit that I'd have to take loss of, the H&S, whatever that stands for, I don't know. This game comes with very little in the way of historical analysis. It feels like a magazine game that instead of getting a magazine, you pay for a box, you know. So you don't have the historical analysis that you do in an S&T or whatever. You're probably paying the same kind of price for it. From what I've seen of... at least what these suckers run for now, they run about the same as the magazine games. Okay, so this is mostly the situation at the end of the night as the morning begins to break. These guys took a pot shot at these UN units that are moving up to cut them off. Now they're low ammo. There's a headquarters in there, but it's isolated, so at least as far as I can tell. So it's not going to be able to resupply the units with it. Actually, it may not be isolated because of that. Never mind. I'm not going to bother looking up the rules. My feeling is this is a game that it's not worth trying to learn the rules for. So anyway, beginning of the morning, we're going to be able to get some reinforcements for the Chinese, for whatever that does. We'll see how this starts to play out. But as of right now, one thing I've learned by examining the charts and thinking a little bit is, you know, assaulting with the UN forces doesn't make a lot of sense. I got so much firepower. Even when I have pretty good odds, like here, it's not great odds. I could get like 4-to-1 the night, I think. At least 3-to-1, but the night shifts me down to here, and that's just not a very good effect coming down in these layers. I have to get extraordinarily good odds to make it worth my while. Whereas when I just fire, I'm going to pound things to crap anyway, because I've got so much firepower, especially compared to the Chinese units. You know, these guys at best have about 6 firepower on them. The artillery obviously is a little stronger, but there isn't, I think that's the only one. And, you know, my average Marine platoon? No. My average Marine company has 9 firepower. That's what my armor has as well. I've got some smaller units that the heavy weapons brigades have like 6 firepower with a range of 2. I can just get overwhelming fire support into a hex. Yes, I'm not going to do a whole hell of a lot of damage with firepower, but I'm going to do better overall results than if I'm you know, trading casualties on the assault tables. This sucker's just getting more and more painful as I go on. During the Chinese phase. Okay, I got this stupid supply points coming in, which is part of having to deal with the supply on top of everything else is almost got me convinced that it's time to quit. I don't think I can keep playing this tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning I'll be all excited and willing to try again, but here's the deal. Once you start getting daylight turns, the UN forces can pretty much bombard whatever they like at will. I mean, yes, they only have a small number of units that have range, but it's enough, and they're all buried in these piles and impossible to keep track of. So you got to hunt through every stack and look at every single piece, every fire opportunity that you have, basically. Now, I'm forgetting about the opportunity fire because it's just not that interesting. And look, I'm just slaughtering the Chinese anyway, right? I mean, yes, there's a decent number of UN forces getting killed by the assaults, but it's just, you know, pretty damn uninteresting. The disparity in the forces is just ridiculous. Yes, these are supposed to be human wave attacks, but there ain't nothing left to wave with. I don't know. You know, maybe nighttime comes and I'll get lots more units. But right now, my gut feeling is screw this shit. I mean, you know, I could rip my toenails out instead and probably have about as much fun. I'm getting almost nothing. You know, every now and then I get a little bit of story out of this, but I'm so busy fucking around with a little, counting the pieces, counting the numbers, looking for a unit, and probably getting the rules about a third correct at best. Just, you know, because of all the little bits to the rules that are you know, not easily absorbed and not easily remembered. Okay, I kind of fudged my way through the resupply phase. These units here had a trace down this road. Basically, you can go 6 hexes to a road for UN supply. These guys have a problem, but 1, 2, and then I can trace up and there's a dump somewhere under this shit. That dump, though, doesn't have much. So now I'm going to have to start dealing with paper. That is the army dump. Or maybe the things that are set up on the board aren't supposed to be set up on the board because they can't really move. And they could be used on the status track instead. The problem, of course, with that is one of them's this one, which is infinite. And they are listed as set up on the board. But I'm going to use them to track my ammo, I guess. So the U.S. Army dump has 8 ammo points. And if I want to recharge these units, I've got to use 1, 2, 3. Looks like 3 of those 8 already. And I'll get rid of these. That'll make life a little easier. The Udom dump has 19. Well, unfortunately, 19 is not a good number. There's no plus 10. Oh, there is. You know, they tell you to set them up on the goddamn board. Fuck me. Alright, well, I'll try to find the other one and set it up as well. I had moved it with a pile. You know, this game is just such a fucking waste of time. I'm real close to kicking it in. If I had something I wanted to do right away, I'd be cleaning it up and starting to set that up right now. I'm not even looking forward to trashing this thing, because the only thing I can think of to say about it is it reminds me so damn much of Panzerblitz. Except if you had way too many counters and they were too small and you couldn't see the terrain. No, it's not quite as bad as those games, because at least this is a historical situation. But man, it is so unpleasant to play. And I'm getting nothing out of it. And I don't think anybody who's watching it is watching it for anything except to see me rant about it. And I don't think anybody's even enjoying that, from what I can see. This thing is just miserable to play. So I had convinced myself, you know what? I haven't shown enough of the game. There's things like replacements I haven't shown completely. But I come to the problem that I had when I was reading the rules. Returning UN wounded. First of all, I've probably had units that did not have a line of supply back to the hospital that I've put in the boxes, which screws that up. Alright, but I could live through that, I guess. I mean, you know, I just want out, you know? I think that's what it comes to. At the start, the UN player may remove 2 units from the field hospital that have the same unit type and return one of them to the map at the lowest step value. Well, that works fine. Like if I want to return one of these heavy weapons. I flip one. Oh, no. They only have 1 step anyway. So boom, that works. And that'll go somewhere on the map. I don't know what this is doing here. It doesn't belong in there, I don't think. But when I got these suckers, their lowest step value is these. I don't think that's what it means, but God knows. Part of them may still be on the map. I give up. I mean, I really do. This is it. This game is simply not worth the effort. Maybe some other day, maybe when I'm grown up, whatever. You know, because some of me feels like, wow, you know, I remember when I first dealt with hard war games, they felt kind of like this. But, you know, I've dealt with games that are more complex than this, that have more pieces on the board. This one irritates the living shit out of me. And that's all there is to it. I've dealt with worse rules, but I've been able to force my way through them. I'm just looking for an excuse out of this one, and I'm taking it at this point. One kind of positive thing is I'm not completely without games on the subject matter. I've got a decision games game, which, for all I know, maybe a reprint of this. I'll be back to review it, and I'll just tag it into this video because it's not going to be long. I'm just bailing, and the hell with it. Alright. I'm afraid I don't have much good to say about this, given that I bailed. It's probably pretty damn bad, right? I bailed after a couple of turns. So why? The rules are not great. There's no question there. There's ambiguities there. Worse, though, they're very difficult to sink in. They're rules by exception, largely. All kinds of little special cases, this, that, and the other. And if I was deadly interested in the subject matter, I could cope with them. But I'm not getting enough out of this to be worth playing any further, to be worth even seeing what some of the subsystems look like. In essence, I guess my biggest problem is big stacks of units, all with firepower capabilities. Many of them with enough range that you have to hunt through the stacks, find the pieces you want, and you get to fire them every turn, basically. Ammunition's not, you know, a limited... So, you run out of ammo on a 1 in 6 chance, basically, if you bother to notice. that's another factor, is that there's a couple of rules that require that you notice something or remember something at the time you roll it, and if you don't, well, you know, you don't take a penalty, right? I mean, like the out of ammo, there's nothing to help you on the charts. And in fact, that's one of the big gripes that I have about this, is that there just is not sufficient support in the components to really help you play a game with this many exceptions and special cases. I almost feel like there needs to be a card of stupid things, you know, that are hidden in the rolls that you won't remember or whatever. Component-wise, the map obviously kind of lackluster. I'm bitchy about the terrain effects chart. These hidden unit holding boxes, neat idea, but if you don't provide, there's not sufficient support provided to use them. You basically have to write down a specific unit on the board that has those hidden units, and I can tell you, I will forget which unit it is that I have written down, and those units will just disappear for a while, and then maybe they'll reappear and be like a horrible ambush or something. I don't know. But I can tell you, there's a lot in this game that's of that nature, where I can just see it's going to be this frustrating and annoying to play game, no matter what. The huge stacks of counters, looking every turn to try to figure out how many fire points I have, this constant optimization. Just so many things. So many things that make this very difficult to play. And, you know, I was able to force my way through, say, the Battles of the Age of Reason, which I found very mechanically disturbing, and maybe not to the degree that this is. I've said it before in the playthroughs, this reminds me of Panzer Blitz. It reminds me of everything I don't like about, well, of a lot I don't like about Panzer Blitz. If you were to expand it to a reasonable size, kind of interesting scenario, like most Panzer Blitz, Panzer Leader, Squad Leader scenarios are these stupid little things. This is what you would get if you tried to blow those systems up into, you know, something where you were handling a larger amount of units, where you just have so much to keep track of and so much to fire in each round. Now, you know, in terms of the narrative that I get off of it, it's almost nil, because I can't picture, you know, the lines of troops marching forward in a Napoleonic or an Ancients battle. All I have is kind of the sort of imagery that I get in maybe an operational game, which is if I step back from it and I can pretend I understand what's going on in the field a little bit. But it just doesn't give me any help there either in terms of trying to present me with more of a visual. Now that's got more to do with the era than anything else. And it's the big thing that I don't really like about, you know, 20th century warfare, is that troops are not moving forward in these tight formations that I get to watch, you know, and see deploy and see them start to fight, and can understand how they operate. Instead, there's these little fire teams and squads and everything, and I can't picture them when I'm looking at a piece that says it's a company, you know, because I know that I'm not seeing, you know, something that's an integral unit altogether in one place operating as a formation. So I really dislike this game and cannot play it further, and that's why I cleaned it up. But I could see people liking it. That's kind of the disturbing thing, and what I would have liked to have played it out more was to give a better feel to the people who might like it. I think if you were really hooked on this period and really did want this level of it could be an interesting game, except for one problem. And I'm not the only person. I looked at the comments and saw at least one person seems to have noted, hey, I played 2 turns of it and the Chinese were pretty much wiped out. Yeah, that firepower advantage that the UN has, I mean, I feel like I could just suppress the entire Chinese army. Now, granted, some of it's coming back. There's no question there. So here's the thing. If I played out the replacements and shit, you got to keep count of every step you lose. Now, if I have a little mechanical adding machine for each side and I can just click that down or whatever, that's fine. But keeping track of that on paper, that's going to be annoying. Even just with hash marks, it's going to be a bitch and a half because step losses happen pretty damn often in the game. So I had this thought of, well, I could count it up after the game, and you can't do that because what you need to be able to keep track of the replacement points that are coming in, and those would have screwed it up no matter what. Once I saw that there were replacement points every turn, I realized I'm just hosed. I can't possibly, play this out and calculate victory at the end of it. But the number of replacement points isn't high enough for the Chinese to be able to mount more attacks once they're destroyed. So I think it's actually quite possible that the UN could basically hold their position as long as they like. You don't have to pull out. And if that's the case, that's what it really looks like. The only thing that's going to restrict you is ammunition. But it looks not unreasonable to me for the UN to clear the roads and start driving the ammo up in trucks. They've got the airlift capacity. The chances of a given attack roll depleting ammunition seemed pretty low, especially if you don't pay enough attention so you don't see whether or not you roll doubles, probably 2/3 of the time or whatever. I mean, I have no idea, but I got almost no ammo low results, and the reason that I would guess is this inability to remember I got to check for doubles on every single die roll. It's not like, say, a CWB game or something along that line where, maybe there's this extra die sitting out there and it calls your attention to it. Nah, this is, you're rolling the dice, you look on the chart, there's nothing in the chart to help you remind you. Like so many things, the play aids are not sufficient for, me. Now, like some other games, hey, if you played a lot of this, it would become second nature, but it's a standalone. It's not part of a series. So, learning this system, this kind of, one-off design on a rarely covered subject matter. Korean War doesn't get a lot of attention anyway. One battle from the war. I'm hoping the Decision Games game at least has, it has enough battles in it. It has, I think, 3. That, well, you can get used to it over one battle and then play the other 2 out and feel a little more comfortable about it. But no matter what, the mechanical pain in the ass of counting up, of searching for firepower in these big stacks of units, that just does not appeal to me. And I said earlier in the playthrough, it actually is what worries me about some of the OCS games, and in particular Blitzkrieg Legend. I know that's going to have huge amounts of stuff. Burma wasn't so bad. I'm sure Reluctant Enemies won't be too bad. But I really don't want to face a situation where I've just got piles and piles of pieces in little clusters, and then I have to figure out how to optimize, my fire missions and such. But with this, because ammunition only fails when you roll the dice and they match, and you happen to notice it, no, that's not in the rules, but I mean, come on. If you don't notice it, what are you going to do? Because of that factor, it's like, well, all right, I'll shoot. All right, I'll shoot. Now, I could see where you might cut that back a little bit if you start running low on ammo, if it's going to be hard to get the ammo. But, like I said, I think the U.S. can pretty much go wherever they like. They're not going to suffer any serious losses in this game. And they can chew up the Chinese using firepower. The Chinese have, you know, some possibility of using the assault combat to get some advantage out of it. But they get pretty chewed up trying to do that. So I don't see how the Chinese are going to be able to force the U.S. to leave on victory point terms. Now, before the victory point penalty expires. And if they can't do that, they're going to be if they try to, they're going to be taking more losses. And then as the UN forces pull back, they become a tougher, more solid location. Now, if you played with the optional ammo rolls, as opposed to the ones I was playing with, you have to worry about resupplying every turn, every daylight turn, basically, getting the supplies in to your main base. Since that firepower is limited, it's going to be tough. It's going to make it tougher on the UN. They're going to have to make hard choices as to whether or not they want to roll the dice on firing more often. Just because if they run out of ammo or run ammo low, now they're losing an irreplaceable resource, something that they only get 4 of each turn. So if they were really heavily overwhelmed, you could see that they ran out of ammo during the period. Anyway, I really hate doing this, you know, jumping out of a game that I think I could have played but never could have assessed victory for because of the early screw up of not counting the step losses right away. But there's just too many aspects of this game that are too mechanically demanding that it makes me say, I have no interest whatsoever in playing this. The subject matter fascinates me. The game itself, it's simply too much for me to cope with something that I enjoy as little as I do 20th century warfare. So, you know, to me this is something of a stinker. But some people might find it more appealing than I do, I guess. It certainly had reasonable ratings over on Board Game Geek. But you get the feeling some of the people who rated it read the rules and didn't actually try to play it. Some of them gave it very high ratings, though. And note, yeah, I'm pawing through all the pieces every turn. I guess they just really love 20th century warfare enough to cope with that, just like I like the ancients enough to cope with great battles of history. Or I almost like 7 Years' War enough to cope with the battles of the Age of Reason. Anyway, we'll see. I have no idea what's coming next. I'd like to do something enjoyable at some point. Unconditional surrender was fun.